The wind was howling like a banshee, and snow was piling up against our front door faster than I'd ever seen. I stood there in my thin jacket, keys in my trembling hand, watching through the frosted window as my own family sat around the dinner table, laughing and eating the meal I'd helped prepare just hours before. My stepmother caught my eye through the glass, smiled coldly, and reached over to turn the deadbolt. The metallic click echoed in my ears louder than the storm itself. That was the moment I realized they'd planned this all along. But what happened next would change everything, and their smug faces would soon turn to pure terror when they saw who was standing behind me at that same door just 12 hours later. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Connor Walsh, and this story takes place during what would later be called the worst blizzard to hit Minnesota in 30 years. But for me, it wasn't the weather that nearly killed me that night. It was my own family. Let me back up 6 months. My dad, Michael Walsh, had remarried after my mom died in a car accident when I was 15. I was now 17, a senior, at Northfield High, and living with my new stepfamily in what used to be my childhood home. My stepmother, Patricia Henley Walsh, moved in with her 2 kids, Bradley, who was 18, and built like he spent every waking moment at the gym, and Melissa, 16, who had perfected the art of making me feel invisible. Patricia had this way of smiling at me in front of my dad that made her look like Mother of the Year, but the second he left for his job at the construction company, that mask would slip. She'd make comments about how much food I ate, how I was taking up space that could be better used for her real children, and how my dad would be so much happier if he didn't have the burden of dealing with his troubled son. The thing is, I wasn't troubled. I worked part-time at Henderson's hardware store after school, maintained a 3.8 GPA, and pretty much kept to myself. I'd learned early that the less I existed in their world, the smoother things went for everyone. My dad was so exhausted from working 60-hour weeks to support his new expanded family that he rarely noticed the tension brewing under his own roof. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday in February. I woke up to my phone buzzing with weather alerts about an incoming storm system. School was still on, but they warned it might be canceled by afternoon. I went downstairs to grab breakfast and found Patricia at the stove, making pancakes for Bradley and Melissa. "There's cereal in the pantry," she said without looking at me. This was normal. Bradley and Melissa got hot breakfasts. I got whatever was left over or easy to grab. I poured myself some generic cornflakes and sat at the counter. "Connor," Patricia said, finally turning around. "I need you to walk to Miller's grocery after school today and pick up some things for dinner. The storm's supposed to hit tonight and we need to stock up." She handed me a $20 bill and a grocery list that was easily $40 worth of items. This was also normal, giving me impossible tasks and then acting like I was the problem when I couldn't complete them. "The list is pretty long," I said carefully. "Maybe Bradley could drive me, or we could go together?" Bradley snorted from his spot at the table. "I've got basketball practice. Not my problem, you can't drive yet." I could drive. I'd had my license for 8 months, but Patricia had convinced my dad that I was too irresponsible to have access to a car, despite the fact that I'd never been in trouble, never had so much as a detention. Meanwhile, Bradley had crashed his car into a mailbox just 3 weeks prior, and he still got to drive Patricia's Honda whenever he wanted. "Just figure it out," Patricia said, turning back to the stove. "We're having a nice family dinner tonight, and I need those ingredients." The way she said family dinner made it clear that while I was expected to provide the groceries, I wasn't necessarily invited to eat what I'd helped purchase. School went by in a blur. By lunch, the snow had started falling, not the gentle, pretty kind you see in movies, but angry sideways snow that stung your face and made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. By the time final bell rang at 3:15, they were announcing that evening activities were canceled and buses would run early. I caught the last bus to the stop near Miller's Grocery, clutching Patricia's $20 bill and her impossible list. The store was packed with people stocking up for the storm. I managed to find about half the items on her list before running out of money. I knew this would be a problem, but I also knew that coming home empty-handed would be a bigger one. The walk home took 45 minutes instead of the usual 15. The wind had picked up significantly, and the snow was now falling so hard that I could barely see the streetlights. My thin jacket, the only winter coat I owned, was soaked through by the time I reached our street. Our house sat on a corner lot, a modest 2-story colonial that had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandparents had left it to my dad, and it was supposed to be mine someday. But looking at it through the swirling snow that night, with warm light glowing from every window, it felt less like home and more like a fortress I wasn't allowed to enter. I knocked on the front door, my hands too cold to properly grip my keys. Bradley opened it, took one look at me and the grocery bags, and shook his head. "You're dripping wet," he said. "Mom doesn't want you tracking snow through the house." "It's my house, too," I replied, which was apparently the wrong thing to say. Patricia appeared behind him, wearing the apron my mom used to wear when she cooked Sunday dinners. "Did you get everything on the list?" I held up the bags. "I got what I could with $20. The prices were higher than, so you didn't follow simple instructions. The money wasn't enough for everything. I tried to—" "Bradley, close. The door. Connor can come in when he learns to follow directions properly." The door slammed in my face. I stood there for a moment, certain this was just another one of Patricia's power games. She'd make me wait 5 minutes, maybe 10, then let me in with some lecture about responsibility. I pulled out my phone to call my dad, but there was no signal. The storm must have knocked out a cell tower. I tried knocking again. This time, Melissa answered. "Patricia says you can't come in until you go back and get the rest of the groceries." "The store's probably closed by now," I said, "and even if it's not, I don't have any more money." "Not my problem," she said, and shut the door again. That's when I heard it, the deadbolt turning. They had actually locked me out. I walked around to the back door, fishing my keys out of my pocket. But when I tried to unlock it, the key wouldn't turn. They'd changed the locks or added additional ones. I tried every window on the ground floor, all locked. The temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees since I'd left school. The wind was howling now, and the snow was coming down so hard I could barely see the house next door. I was soaked, freezing, and locked out of my own home during what was shaping up to be a genuinely dangerous storm. I went back to the front window and looked in. They were all there in the dining room. My dad had apparently come home early, from work. They were eating dinner around the table that had been my family's for decades, using the dishes my mom had picked out, sitting in chairs my grandparents had refinished by hand. Patricia was serving what looked like pot roast and mashed potatoes, comfort food for a snowy night. My dad was laughing at something Bradley had said. He looked relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen since before Mom died. Patricia had her hand on his shoulder, playing the perfect wife and stepmother. Melissa was showing them something on her phone, probably pictures from school. They looked like a complete family, a family that didn't include me. I knocked on the window, and Patricia looked up. Our eyes met through the glass, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something that might have been guilt cross her face. But then she smiled, not the fake sweet smile she used in front of my dad, but something cold and satisfied. She reached over, without breaking eye contact, and turned the deadbolt on the front door. The sound of that lock clicking into place was the moment I realized this wasn't a game or a punishment that would end in an hour. They had planned this. They wanted me gone. I stood there staring at Patricia through that window, my breath forming clouds in the rapidly dropping temperature, and something inside me shifted. The hurt was still there, but underneath it was something harder. Determination, maybe. Or just the basic human instinct to survive. I pulled out my phone again. Still no signal, but I noticed the time. 6:47 p.m. The temperature display read 18 degrees, and that was before accounting for wind chill. Weather alerts kept popping up even without service. Warnings about hypothermia, frostbite, and staying indoors at all costs. My first thought was Mrs. Kowalski next door. She'd been friends with my mom since before I was born, and she still brought over cookies on my birthday every year. But when I trudged through the mounting snow to her house, all the windows were dark. A note taped to her door read, "Gone to stay with daughter in Minneapolis until storm passes." The Hendersons across the street were gone too. Their driveway hadn't been shoveled in days, and newspapers were piling up on their porch. The Garcias 2 houses down had their lights on, but when I knocked, no one answered. Either they couldn't hear me over the wind, or they were following the smart advice to not open doors for strangers during a blizzard. My jacket was completely soaked now, and I could feel water seeping through my shoes. My fingers were starting to go numb, which I knew was a bad sign. I had to find shelter, fast. The old storage shed in our backyard was my next option. Dad had built it himself when I was 12, and I'd spent countless summer afternoons there organizing his tools and helping with projects. The lock was frozen solid, but I remembered he kept a spare key under a fake rock near the foundation. It took me 15 minutes of digging through the snow with my bare hands to find it, and by then I couldn't feel my fingers at all. But the key was there, and the door opened with a screech of protest against the wind. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Inside, the shed was cramped but dry. Dad's workbench took up most of one wall, covered with tools and half-finished projects. An old space heater sat in the corner, not plugged in, but it gave me hope. I found a flashlight that still worked and used it to locate the electrical outlet. The space heater hummed to life, throwing out a circle of blessed warmth about 3 feet in diameter. I pulled off my soaked jacket and shoes, hanging them on some wall hooks to dry. My socks were wet too, but at least my feet were starting to feel back. There was an old camping chair folded against the wall, and I set it up right in front of the heater. For the first time since being locked out, I felt like I might actually survive the night. But as I sat there in my damp clothes, listening to the storm rage outside, the reality of my situation began to sink in. My own family, the people who were supposed to love and protect me, had deliberately put me in mortal danger. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision or miscommunication. Patricia had orchestrated this, probably planning it since the weather alert started coming in. The changed locks, the impossible grocery run, the convenient absence of my house. Key working on the back door. It was all calculated. But why? What did she gain from potentially killing me? The answer came to me as I warmed up enough to think clearly. The house. My grandparents' house, which was supposed to pass to me when I turned 18 in 4 months. Patricia had been dropping hints for weeks about how much space Bradley needed for his future plans, and how the basement would make a perfect apartment for when he started community college next year. If something happened to me, if I disappeared or, God forbid, died, there would be no one to contest my dad signing over my inheritance to his new family. And if it happened during a natural disaster, well, that was just a tragedy. A terrible accident that no one could have prevented. My hands shook as this realization hit me, and it wasn't from the cold anymore. Around 9 o'clock, I heard voices outside. Through the small shed window, I could see flashlight beams moving around our yard. My heart jumped. Maybe they'd realized how dangerous this was and come looking for me. "Connor!" It was my dad's voice. "Connor, where are you?" I started to get up, then stopped. There was something off about his tone. He didn't sound panicked or worried. He sounded rehearsed. "We checked everywhere." Bradley's voice carried on the wind. "Maybe he found somewhere else to go." poor kid," Patricia chimed in, and I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing at the fake concern in her voice. "He was so upset about not getting all the groceries. I hope he's safe somewhere." "He's probably at a friend's house," Melissa added. "You know how dramatic he gets." Dramatic. The kid who'd just been locked out of his own house during a blizzard was being called dramatic. "Well, we tried," my dad said, and I heard the defeat in his voice that told me he was ready to go back inside where it was warm. "If he comes back, he comes back." The flashlight beams moved away from the shed area and back toward the house. Within minutes, I saw the lights come on in the living room, and through our neighbor's fence, I could make out shapes settling in to watch TV. They'd performed their due diligence. If anyone asked later, they could honestly say they'd looked for me. But they'd made sure not to look too hard, and they certainly hadn't checked the one place on the property where I might actually survive the night. The shed had one small window that faced the back of our house, and from my chair, I could see directly into our kitchen. Over the next few hours, I watched my family's evening routine play out like a TV show I wasn't allowed to participate in. Patricia made hot chocolate. I could see the steam rising from the mugs and the way everyone gathered around the kitchen island like some kind of Norman Rockwell painting. My dad kept checking his phone and looking toward the back door, but Patricia would put her hand on his arm and say something that made him nod and turn away. Around 10:30, I watched Bradley raid the refrigerator for leftover pot roast. He made himself a sandwich the size of a small building and grabbed a bag of chips that I'd bought with my own money from my hardware store job. Melissa joined him, and they stood at the counter eating and laughing about something on her phone. The normalcy of it was almost worse than the cold had been. They weren't agonizing over my disappearance or calling hospitals or organizing search parties. They were having a perfectly pleasant family evening while I sat 50 feet away, struggling to stay warm enough to live until morning. But the strangest thing was my dad. I kept waiting for him to demand they call the police or insist on going, out to look for me again. Instead, he seemed almost relieved, like some burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Had Patricia gotten to him too? Had she convinced him that his life would be simpler, happier, better without his difficult teenage son taking up space and resources? The thought made my chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with the cold air. Around midnight, the space heater started making a concerning rattling noise. I turned it off for a few minutes to let it cool down, and the temperature in the shed dropped immediately. When I turned it back on, it worked, but the rattling was worse. I realized that if the heater died, I probably wouldn't make it until morning. The storm was supposed to continue until at least noon the next day, and the temperature was still dropping. Even in the shed, I could feel the cold creeping in around the edges. That's when I started planning. If my family thought they could just wait for me to disappear, they were wrong. If they thought this was some kind of game they could win by outlasting me, they had another thing coming. I was going to survive this night, and when morning came, I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what they'd done to me. I just had to make it until dawn first. The space heater died at 2:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I've been checking my phone obsessively, watching the battery drain from 23% to 18% to 12%. The rattling had gotten worse over the past hour, and then suddenly it just stopped. The orange glow faded, and within minutes, I could see my breath again. I tried everything, unplugging it, plugging it back in, checking the outlet with my dad's multimeter. Nothing. The heating element had burned out and I was alone in a wooden box during the worst blizzard in 30 years. The cold came back fast and mean. I put my jacket back on even though it was still damp, and I wrapped myself in an old paint-stained tarp I found on one of the shelves. It smelled like turpentine and didn't provide much warmth, but it was something. My phone battery hit 8%, and I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of letting it die slowly, I turned it completely off. If I was going to survive until morning, I might need those last few minutes of power for something important. The shed had become a freezer. Every breath hurt my lungs, and I could feel my core temperature dropping. I knew from health class that when hypothermia really sets in, you stop shivering and start feeling warm. That would be the beginning of the end. I had to move. I couldn't just sit there waiting to freeze to death. I started doing jumping jacks in the tiny space, bumping into the workbench and knocking over paint cans. The noise seemed impossibly loud in the quiet shed, but I didn't care. Movement was life. I did push-ups against the workbench, squats in the corner, anything to keep my blood flowing. When I got too exhausted to continue, I'd rest for exactly 60 seconds, counting it out loud, then start again. I kept this cycle going for hours, until the sky outside the small window started to show the faintest hint of gray. Dawn was coming, but I wasn't sure I was going to make it. My movements were getting sluggish, and twice I caught myself sitting, down without meaning to. The second time, I realized I'd been sitting for several minutes without noticing, which meant my brain was starting to shut down from the cold. That's when I remembered my dad's emergency kit. Every construction worker worth his salt keeps emergency supplies, and my dad was no exception. I tore through the shed with clumsy, numb fingers until I found it. A metal toolbox labeled "Emergency" in my dad's careful handwriting. Inside was a treasure trove of survival gear. Chemical hand warmers, emergency blankets, waterproof matches, energy bars, and, most importantly, a small emergency radio with a hand crank for power. I activated 4 hand warmers and stuffed them inside my jacket, then wrapped myself in 2 emergency blankets that crinkled like aluminum foil but actually trapped heat. The energy bars were frozen solid, but I gnawed on them anyway, desperate for calories to fuel my body's fight against the cold. The radio took forever to charge with the hand crank, but eventually it crackled to life. The emergency broadcast was on repeat. Blizzard conditions continue with winds up to 70 miles per hour. The temperature is currently -8 degrees with a wind chill of -35. All residents are advised to remain indoors. Emergency services are suspended until conditions improve. -35 degrees with wind chill. If I'd stayed outside, I would have been dead in an hour. But the radio gave me something more valuable than weather information. It gave me hope, and it gave me a plan. At 6:30 a.m., I heard the snowplow rumble down our street, the first sign that the world outside was waking up. The storm was still raging, but it wasn't quite as violent as it had been during the night. Through the shed window, I could see that the snow had drifted against our house almost up to the first-floor windows. I cranked the radio again and found a local news station. They were taking calls from stranded residents, and that's when I knew what I had to do. I turned my phone back on, 6% battery remaining, and dialed the station's call-in number. It took 3 tries to get through, but finally I heard a woman's voice. "WCCO News, you're on the air." "Hi, my name is Connor Walsh, and I'm calling from Northfield. I need help, but I also need people to hear what happened to me last night." "Go." "Ahead, Connor. Are you safe?" I took a deep breath, my voice shaking from more than just the cold. "My family locked me out of my house during the blizzard. Deliberately. I've been trapped in a shed all night, and I nearly died." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" "My stepmother locked me out during the storm, changed the lock so I couldn't get in. I've been in my dad's shed since yesterday evening, and my phone is about to die. I need someone to know what happened in case." I let that hang in the air. "Connor, are you in immediate danger right now?" "The heater died, but I found some emergency supplies. I think I can make it until the roads are clear, but I need the police to know what happened here. This wasn't an accident. Stay on the line. Connor, we're going to connect you with emergency services right now." The next voice I heard was a dispatcher from the Dakota County Sheriff's Office. "This is Deputy Martinez. Connor, can you tell me your exact location?" I gave her my address and explained the shed's location. She confirmed that emergency vehicles were starting to move again, now that the worst of the storm had passed, and that they would send someone as soon as possible. "Connor, I need you to stay warm and stay awake until we get there. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Deputy Martinez? I want to press charges. What they did to me was attempted murder." There was a long pause. "We'll sort all that out when we get there. Just focus on staying safe." The call ended, and my phone died 30 seconds later. But I'd done it. The authorities knew where I was, and they were coming. More importantly, I'd gotten my story on the radio, where potentially thousands of people had heard it. Patricia couldn't spin this as a misunderstanding or an accident. Too many people now know the truth. I settled back in my chair, wrapped in emergency blankets with chemical hand warmers pressed against my chest, and waited. The shed was still freezing, but I felt warmer than I had all night. Not physically. Physically, I was probably hypothermic and would need medical attention. But emotionally, spiritually, I felt like I was burning with righteous fire. Around 8:15 a.m., I heard vehicles pulling up outside. Multiple vehicles. Not just one patrol car, but several. I looked through the shed window and saw the most beautiful sight of my life. Police cars, an ambulance, and what looked like a fire department. SUV, all with their lights flashing. I also saw something else through the kitchen window of my house. My family, all 4 of them, standing at the window looking out at the emergency vehicles with expressions of pure panic. They'd probably heard my radio call. They knew their game was over. I managed to stand up and make my way to the shed door, just as I heard heavy footsteps crunching through the snow toward me. "Connor Walsh?" a voice called out. "Here," I shouted back, my voice hoarse from the cold. "I'm in the shed." The door opened, and a sheriff's deputy stepped inside, followed immediately by 2 paramedics. The relief on their faces when they saw me alive was almost overwhelming. "Jesus, kid, you made it," the deputy said. "I'm Deputy Martinez. We talked on the phone. How are you feeling?" "Cold," I managed. "Really, really cold, but alive." One of the paramedics was already checking my pulse and shining a light in my eyes. "We need to get you to a hospital to check for hypothermia and frostbite," she said. "But first, can you walk?" I took a step and nearly fell over. My legs were shaky, and my feet felt like blocks of wood, but I was mobile. "I think so." "Good. We're going to get you warmed up and checked out, and then Deputy Martinez is going to want to hear your full story." As they helped me toward the door, I looked back at the house. All 4 faces were still pressed against the kitchen window. Watching the paramedics escort me out of the shed they'd assumed would be my tomb, but the look on Patricia's face wasn't panic anymore. It was pure, undiluted rage. She knew I'd survived, and she knew I was going to destroy her perfect little family with the truth. The war was just beginning. The ambulance was the warmest place I'd been in 12 hours. The paramedics wrapped me in heated blankets and started an IV to get fluids into my dehydrated system. My core temperature was 94.2 degrees, not quite severe hypothermia, but close enough that I could have died if I'd been out there much longer. "You're one tough kid," the paramedic Sarah told me as she checked my feet for frostbite. "Most people wouldn't have thought to keep moving all night. That probably saved your life." Deputy Martinez rode with us to the hospital, taking notes. As I told her everything, the grocery store setup, the changed locks, Patricia's cold smile through the window, the fake search with flashlights. She recorded every word on her phone, stopping me occasionally to ask for clarification or specific details. "And you're certain the locks were changed deliberately?" she asked. "Positive. My key worked fine yesterday morning when I left for school." "And they didn't just lock the door, they added extra deadbolts. I could see them through the window." "What about your father? Do you think he was part of this plan?" That was the question I'd been dreading. I don't know. At first I thought Patricia was manipulating him. But last night when they were searching for me, he seemed almost relieved. Like he wanted me gone too. Deputy Martinez made more notes. We'll be interviewing all of them separately. Sometimes the truth comes out when people can't coordinate their stories. At the hospital, they kept me for 6 hours. Blood tests, warming treatments, psychological evaluation. The doctor said, I was incredibly lucky. Another hour outside and I would have been looking at permanent nerve damage, possibly losing fingers or toes to frostbite. While I was being treated, Deputy Martinez was busy. She came back around noon with updates. We executed a search warrant. On your house, she said. Found some interesting things. Your stepmother had researched hypothermia symptoms on her computer the day before the storm hit. She also looked up how long it takes for someone to freeze to death and whether bodies can be recovered after blizzards. My stomach turned. She was planning this. It gets worse. We found text messages between her and her son Bradley. She texted him at 5:30 yesterday evening, right around when you got home with the groceries. The message said, Phase 1 complete. Kid is locked out. Now we wait. Phase 1? That's what we're trying to figure out. There were other messages, but they were deleted. We've got our tech team trying to recover them. A social worker arrived to talk to me about temporary placement. Since my father was potentially involved in a criminal conspiracy against me, I couldn't go home. They wanted to put me in emergency foster care until the investigation was complete. What about relatives? The social worker, Mrs. Chen, asked. Grandparents, aunts, uncles? My mom's sister lives in Chicago. Aunt Rebecca. We haven't talked much since the funeral, but I trailed off, realizing I didn't even have her current phone number. We'll track her down, Deputy Martinez said. In the meantime, you'll stay with a foster family who's experienced with emergency placements. At 3 p.m., they released me from the hospital. As we walked toward Deputy Martinez's patrol car, she got a call on her radio. Martinez, this is dispatch. We've got a situation at the Walsh residence. The stepmother is requesting to speak with the victim. Deputy Martinez looked at me. Patricia wants to talk to you. You don't have to if you're not ready. Something hard and cold settled in my chest. After everything she'd put me through, after literally trying to kill me, she wanted to talk? I want to hear what she has to say, I said. But I want it recorded, and I want witnesses. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to my house. There were still 3 police cars in the driveway, and I could see neighbors gathered on their porches despite the cold, watching the drama unfold. The Walsh family scandal was probably the biggest thing to happen on Maple Street in decades. They'd set up an interview room in our living room, the same living room where I'd opened Christmas presents as a kid, where my mom used to read me bedtime stories, where my family used to watch movies together on Sunday nights. Now it felt like a courtroom. Patricia sat on the couch wearing her best dress and a carefully constructed expression of maternal concern. My dad sat beside her, looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. Bradley and Melissa were nowhere to be seen, probably being interviewed separately upstairs. Connor, sweetheart, Patricia said the moment I walked in, her voice dripping with fake emotion. Thank God you're okay. We were so worried when we couldn't find you. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. You locked me out, I said. Simply, that's not what happened at all. She turned to Deputy Martinez with practiced innocence. There was a misunderstanding. Connor was upset because he couldn't complete the grocery shopping and he stormed off. We tried to find him, but the storm was so bad. Then why did you change the locks? I asked. For just a second, her mask slipped. I saw a flicker of the cold calculation I'd witnessed through the kitchen window. But she recovered quickly. We didn't change any locks. Your key must have been damaged by the cold, or maybe you were too upset to use it properly. Deputy Martinez cleared her throat. Mrs. Walsh, we found the old locks in your garage, along with the receipt from Home Depot where you purchased new ones yesterday morning, 6 hours before the storm hit. Patricia's face went pale. We were upgrading our security. It had nothing to do with... and the internet searches. About hypothermia? Research for a school project Bradley was working on? What about the text message to your son? Phase 1 complete. Kid is locked out. Now we wait. The silence stretched for a full 30 seconds. Patricia looked at my dad, then at Deputy Martinez, then finally at me. When she spoke again, her voice was completely different. No more fake sweetness, just cold, hard truth. He was never supposed to be part of this family, she said quietly. Michael needed to move on from his past, and Connor was just holding him back, holding all of us back. My dad flinched like he'd been slapped. Patricia, what are you saying? I'm saying what you've been thinking for months. Your son is a burden, Michael. He takes up space, costs money, and prevents you from fully committing to your new life. To us. You tried to kill him. I gave him an opportunity to leave on his own terms. If he'd been smart, he would have gone to a friend's house or found somewhere else to stay. The fact that he nearly froze to death in a shed just proves how stubborn and stupid he is. The room erupted. My dad jumped up from the couch, his face red with anger. Are you insane? He's my son. He's 17 years old. He's not your son, Patricia snapped back. Not really. Not anymore. You have a new family now, Michael. A better family. One that doesn't come with all the baggage and trauma and constant reminders of your dead wife. That's when my dad hit her. Not a slap, but a full open-handed blow that sent her sprawling across the couch. Deputy Martinez was on him immediately, but he didn't resist. He just stood there staring at his hand like he couldn't believe what he'd done. Ma'am, you're under arrest, Deputy Martinez said to Patricia, who was holding her cheek and glaring at all of us with pure hatred. You have the right to remain silent. As they read her the Miranda rights, Patricia looked directly at me one last time. You think you've won, she said, but you've destroyed this family. Your father will never forgive you for this, and Bradley and Melissa will hate you forever. You'll spend the rest of your life alone, just like you deserve. But as the handcuffs clicked into place around her wrists, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The woman who'd been systematically destroying my life was finally being held accountable for her actions. And despite everything she'd put me through, despite nearly dying in that shed, I had survived. I was still standing, and she was going to jail. Sometimes that's what winning looks like. The trial took place 8 months later, in October. By then, my life had changed in ways I never could have imagined that frozen February night in the shed. Patricia was charged with attempted murder in the 2nd degree, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit bodily harm. Bradley faced charges as an accessory for his role in the text message coordination and for physically preventing me from entering the house. My dad wasn't charged criminally, but the custody situation became complicated fast. I never did go into foster care. 3 days after Patricia's arrest, my phone rang at the temporary placement facility, and I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 2 years. Connor? Honey, it's Aunt Rebecca. My mom's sister had seen the news coverage. Apparently my story had made national headlines as teen survives family's murder plot during historic blizzard. She flew in from Chicago that same week and filed for emergency custody. Your mother would roll over in her grave if she knew what that woman did to you, Rebecca said as we sat in a lawyer's office downtown. You're coming home with me, and we're going to make sure you get everything that's rightfully yours. Aunt Rebecca was nothing like my mom physically. Where Mom had been soft and gentle, Rebecca was sharp angles and fierce determination. But she had the same eyes, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had family again. The house situation got resolved faster than anyone expected. Since Patricia was in jail and my dad was facing a civil lawsuit for neglect and endangerment, the court appointed a guardian to manage my inheritance until I turned 18. Rebecca became that guardian, and she immediately filed to have the house transferred back to me as the rightful heir. My dad didn't fight it. In fact, He seemed broken by the whole experience. The last time I saw him before the trial, he came to Rebecca's hotel room and just stood in the doorway crying. I failed. You, he said. I was so desperate to have a family again after your mom died that I let that woman convince me you were the problem. I chose her over my own son, and I almost got you killed. I wanted to be angry with him. Part of me was angry, but mostly I just felt sorry for him. Patricia had manipulated him just like she'd manipulated everyone else, preying on his grief and loneliness to turn him against me. I forgive you, Dad, I said, and I meant it. But I can't trust you anymore. Not after this. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. I understand. I want you to know that I love you. I've always loved you. I just lost my way for a while. That was the last conversation we ever had. He moved to Arizona after the trial and started over. We exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, but we never rebuilt what we'd lost. Bradley and Melissa had different reactions to their mother's crimes. Bradley, who'd always been Patricia's golden child, couldn't accept that she'd done anything wrong. Even after the evidence came out, the deleted text messages our tech team recovered, the internet searches, the receipt for the new locks, he insisted it was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Mom was just trying to teach you responsibility, he told the prosecutor during his deposition. She never meant for you to actually get hurt. Melissa surprised everyone. During her interview with police, she broke down completely and admitted she'd known about the plan. Mom said Connor was ruining our family, she sobbed to Detective Sarah Chen, who'd taken over the case from Deputy Martinez. She said if he disappeared, Dad would be happier and we could be a real family. But I didn't think she meant... I didn't know he could actually die. Melissa was 15, so she wasn't charged as an adult, but she had to testify at her mother's trial. Watching this girl who'd tormented me for months sit on the witness stand and describe how her mother had groomed her to hate me was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. The trial itself was a media circus. Court TV covered it live, and reporters camped out on the courthouse steps every day. Patricia had hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to paint the whole thing as a tragic misunderstanding. A stepmother trying to teach her difficult stepson a lesson that went too far because of an unexpected weather emergency. It didn't work. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos, laid out the evidence methodically. The premeditation was clear. Patricia had researched hypothermia the day before, purchased new locks that morning, sent coordinating text messages to Bradley, and then performed a fake search that deliberately avoided the one place I might actually be found. The most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Kowalski, my elderly neighbor, had returned from her daughter's house in time to testify. She'd been watching from her window the morning after the storm and had seen Patricia in our backyard with a shovel. She was looking at the shed, Mrs. Kowalski testified, just standing there staring at it for the longest time. Then she turned around and went back inside without checking if anyone was in there. I thought it was odd at the time, but now... The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Patricia was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Bradley got 18 months in juvenile detention and 5 years probation. During the sentencing hearing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I'd written and rewritten it dozens of times, but when I stood up at the podium and saw Patricia sitting there in her orange jumpsuit, all my prepared words disappeared. You tried to kill me because I was inconvenient, I said simply, because having me around made your perfect family picture a little more complicated. But you failed. I survived, I'm stronger now, and I'm going to live a good life despite everything you did to me. Patricia stared straight ahead during my entire statement, never once looking at me, but I could see her jaw clench tight, and I knew my words had hit their mark. After the trial, Rebecca and I drove back to Northfield to pack up my remaining belongings from the house. It felt strange walking through those rooms again, the same spaces where I'd been excluded from family dinners, where I'd watched through windows while my family lived their lives without me. But it also felt like closure. I graduated from my new high school in Chicago with a 4.0 GPA and a full scholarship to Northwestern. I'm studying criminal justice now, inspired by Detective Chen and Deputy Martinez, and all the people who fought to get me justice when I couldn't fight for myself. The house in Minnesota has been sold. I used the money to start a foundation that helps teenagers in dangerous family situations, kids who don't have advocates, who are being abused or neglected or pushed out by stepfamilies who see them as obstacles to overcome. Sometimes I think about that night in the shed, about how close I came to dying alone and forgotten. But mostly I think about what it taught me. That survival isn't just about making it through the crisis. It's about what you do with your life after you've proven you're strong enough to keep going. Patricia will be eligible for parole in 8 years. When that day comes, I'll be there to make sure the parole board knows exactly who they're considering releasing back into the world. Because some people deserve second chances, and some people deserve to stay locked out in the cold forever. Learned the difference that night, and I've never forgotten it. The scared, abandoned kid who nearly froze to death in his father's shed is gone. In his place is someone who knows his own worth, who won't let anyone make him feel invisible or unwanted ever again. That's the real victory. Not just surviving, but thriving in spite of everything they tried to take from me. And every morning, when I wake up warm and safe in my apartment near campus, I remember that I'm still here, still fighting, still winning. Sometimes that's all the revenge you need. 5 years after that frozen February night, I got a letter in the mail that changed everything again. It arrived on a Tuesday morning at my apartment in downtown Chicago, where I was finishing my master's degree in social work. The return address made my stomach drop. Minnesota Department of Corrections. Patricia was up for early parole. I'd been dreading this day since the sentencing. Good behavior and overcrowding meant she'd only served 7 years of her 12-year sentence. The parole board was reviewing her case, and as her victim, I had the right to submit an impact statement and appear at the hearing. But that wasn't the only letter I'd received recently. 3 weeks earlier, an envelope had arrived with shaky handwriting I didn't recognize at first. Inside was a 2-page letter from Melissa, now 21, and apparently trying to rebuild her life after her mother's conviction. "Connor," it began. "I know I don't have the right to contact you after everything that happened. I know I was terrible to you, and I know I was part of what almost killed you that night. But I need you to know some things before Mom's parole hearing, things that never came out during the trial." The letter went on to detail Patricia's manipulation in ways I'd never fully understood. How she'd convinced Melissa that I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. How she'd shown Melissa fake text messages that made it look like I was threatening the family. How she'd slowly poisoned everyone against me over months, planting seeds of doubt about my mental health, my intentions, even my relationship with my deceased mother. "She told Dad you were becoming obsessed with Mom's memory in an unhealthy way," Melissa wrote. "She said you were trying to sabotage his new relationship because you couldn't move on from the past. She made it sound like you needed professional help, and that being firm with you was actually kindness. But the most chilling revelation came at the end. Connor, I don't think that night was supposed to be the end of it. Mom had been talking about getting you committed to a psychiatric facility. She said if you had a breakdown from the stress of being disciplined, it would prove you needed professional help. I think locking you out was supposed to make you crack, not kill you. But when the storm got so bad, she just decided to let nature take its course." I read that letter 15 times before I could process what it meant. Patricia hadn't just tried to kill me in a moment of cold calculation. She'd been orchestrating a long-term psychological warfare campaign designed to either drive me insane or get rid of me permanently. Now, sitting in my apartment with the parole notification in my hands, I had to decide whether I was strong enough to face her again. The hearing was scheduled for October 15th, almost exactly 6 years to the day after her sentencing. I flew to Minneapolis the night before and stayed in the same hotel where Aunt Rebecca and I had planned my custody case all those years ago. Rebecca came with me, of course. She was in her 60s now, with silver streaking through her dark hair, but she was still the fiercest advocate I'd ever known. Over the past 5 years, she'd become more than my guardian or even my aunt. She was the mother figure I'd needed after losing my biological mom and nearly dying at the hands of my stepmother. "You don't have to do this," she reminded me as we sat in the hotel restaurant the night before the hearing. "You've built a good life. You don't owe anyone a confrontation with that woman." "I know," I said, "but if I don't speak up, who will? She's convinced the parole board that she's changed, that she's found God in prison, that she's no longer a threat. Someone needs to tell them who she really is." The parole hearing was held in a sterile conference room at the Women's Correctional Facility in Shakopee. Patricia sat at a table with her lawyer and a prison counselor, wearing a modest blue dress and looking every inch the reformed Christian woman she was pretending to be. She was 53 now, and prison had aged her. Her hair was completely gray, pulled back in a simple bun, and her face had the pale, soft look of someone who'd spent years without much sunlight. But her eyes were the same, cold, calculating, and utterly without genuine remorse. The parole board consisted of 3 members, a retired judge, a social worker, and a corrections officer with 30 years of experience. They'd already heard testimony from Patricia's prison counselor about her exemplary behavior, her participation in religious services, and her completion of anger management and family therapy programs. Now it was my turn. "Mr. Walsh," the retired judge said, "you've requested to address the board regarding Patricia Henley's application for parole. Please proceed." I stood up, my prepared statement in my hand, but like at her sentencing, the words I'd written seemed inadequate for the moment. "Patricia Henley didn't just try to kill me one night during a blizzard," I began. "She spent months systematically destroying my relationships, my sense of reality, and my will to fight back. She turned my own father against me, convinced my siblings I was dangerous, and created a situation where my death would have seemed like a tragic accident that no one could have prevented." I looked directly at her as I spoke, and for the first time in 6 years, we made eye contact. There was no fake remorse, no practiced contrition, just the same cold hatred I'd seen through the kitchen window that night. "The board has heard about her good behavior in prison, her religious conversion, her therapy completion," I continued. "But what you haven't heard is what she wrote to her daughter just last month." I pulled out a photocopy of a letter that Detective Chen had forwarded to me, correspondence that Patricia had sent to Melissa, not knowing that Melissa had shared it with law enforcement. In this letter, she tells Melissa that I'm a lying, manipulative sociopath who destroyed their family for attention. She says that everything that happened was my fault, that I could have prevented my own near death by simply acting like a normal teenager. She shows absolutely no recognition that she committed attempted murder and no genuine remorse for her actions. The social worker on the parole board frowned and made a note. "Is this letter recent?" 6 weeks ago, I confirmed. While she was supposedly participating in rehabilitation programs and expressing remorse to her counselors, she was writing to her daughter that I deserved what happened to me. I spent 20 minutes detailing the psychological manipulation, the long-term planning, and the complete lack of genuine remorse that Patricia had shown throughout her incarceration. When I finished, the room was completely silent. Then Patricia's lawyer asked if she could respond. "Connor," Patricia said, her voice soft and filled with practiced sincerity, "I want you to know how sorry I am for what happened that night. I've spent years in therapy learning about my mistakes, and I understand now that I was struggling with untreated mental health issues that caused me to make terrible decisions. It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't known her, hadn't seen the real person behind the mask, I might have believed it myself." I'm not the same person I was 6 years ago, she continued. I've found peace through faith, and I've learned to take responsibility for my actions. I would welcome the opportunity to make amends, not just to Connor, but to my children and to my ex-husband. I believe I can be a productive member of society and help other families avoid the mistakes I made. The retired judge asked if I wanted to respond to her statement. I stood up one final time. Patricia Henley is an expert manipulator who has spent 6 years in prison perfecting her act. She just told you she wants to make amends. But 2 months ago, she was writing letters calling me a sociopath. She just claimed to take responsibility. But in those same letters, she blamed me for my own near-death experience. The woman you're seeing today is the same woman who researched how long it takes to freeze to death, then locked a 17-year-old outside during a blizzard and went to bed. I paused, looking at each board member in turn. Some people change. Some people deserve second chances. Patricia Henley is not one of those people. She's exactly as dangerous today as she was the night she tried to kill me. She's just gotten better at hiding it. The hearing ended, and we waited in the hall for the decision. It took the board 45 minutes to reach their conclusion. The application for parole is denied, the retired judge announced. The board finds that the applicant has not demonstrated genuine rehabilitation or acceptance of responsibility for her crimes. Ms. Henley will be eligible for reconsideration in 2 years. As we walked out of the facility, I felt something I hadn't expected, not triumph or satisfaction, but just a quiet sense of completion. Patricia would spend at least 2 more years in prison, and when she came up for parole again, I'd be there to remind the board who she really was. 6 months later, I graduated with my master's degree and accepted a position with the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. My job is to investigate reports of child abuse and neglect, to be the voice for kids who don't have advocates, who are being failed by the adults who are supposed to protect them. Every case reminds me of that night in the shed, of how close I came to being just another statistic. But it also reminds me of all the people who fought for me: Deputy Martinez, Detective Chen, Aunt Rebecca, the paramedics who saved my life, the prosecutors who got me justice. I never did reconnect with my father. He sent a card when I graduated, with a note saying he was proud of me and sorry for everything. But some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Bradley got out of juvenile detention and disappeared. Last I heard, he was living in Florida and working construction. He never acknowledged his role in what happened, never apologized, never took responsibility. Some people are just like their mother, I guess. But Melissa surprised everyone. She testified at Patricia's parole hearing, too, supporting my statement and providing details about their mother's manipulation that helped keep her locked up. She's in therapy now, trying to undo years of psychological abuse, and we exchange emails occasionally. She'll never be family, but she's not an enemy anymore either. The foundation I started with the money from selling my childhood home has helped 43 teenagers over the past 3 years. Kids who were being abused, neglected, or pushed out by families who saw them as inconvenient. We provide legal advocacy, emergency housing, and long-term support to help them rebuild their lives. Sometimes I think about the scared 17-year-old who nearly froze to death in a shed, who believed his family's lies that he was worthless and unwanted. I wish I could tell him what I know now. That surviving isn't just about making it through the crisis. It's about what you build with the strength you discover in yourself. Patricia Henley tried to erase me from existence, to make me disappear, so her perfect family picture would be complete. Instead, she made me stronger, more determined, and more committed to making sure other kids don't face what I faced alone. Every kid we help through the foundation is proof that she failed. Every life we save is evidence that I didn't just survive, I won. And every morning when I wake up in my own apartment, surrounded by people who love and support me, I'm reminded that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, despite Everything they tried to take from you, the scared kid in the shed is gone. In his place is someone who knows his worth, who fights for others who can't fight for themselves, and who never, ever gives up. That's my legacy from that frozen February night. Not just survival, but the absolute conviction that everyone deserves to be safe, wanted, and loved. Patricia Henley will die in prison if I have anything to say about it. But more importantly, 43 kids are alive and thriving because I survived what she did to me. That's the real victory. That's how you win. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.